The Veld skiff came in low over the rooftops at dawn, its underbelly painted the color of a bruise, and from somewhere inside it, a voice that was not a voice spoke the edict again, the way it had spoken it every morning for 8 years. By order of the conclave, the reproductive privileges of the human species are suspended for 30 solar cycles. The penalty for a live birth is termination of the parents and the offspring. Compliance is grace. Grace is life. Grace is life. Grace is life. The words washed down through the smog like an oil. Ren Mateo stood at the kitchen window with a tin cup in his hand and listened to them the way a man listens to a hymn he no longer believes. The cup was warm. The water inside it tasted faintly of copper because all the water on the eastern reservation tasted faintly of copper now, and you either drank it or you did not drink, and after a while you stopped noticing. Behind him Mira was already dressed. He could hear her moving, the soft slap of bare feet on the synthetic flooring, the click of the closet, the small private sound she made in her throat when she pulled her hair back. 8 years of marriage and he knew the sound the way a sailor knows a wind. He did not turn around. He was watching a Veld harvester unfold its limbs 3 blocks over, sorting through what had once been a public park and was now a gray paste of pulped concrete and dead grass. And he was thinking about how, when he was a boy, his father had taken him to a park like that and bought him a stick of something called sugar floss, pink and almost weightless, and he had eaten it standing on a bench in his 2 big shoes. "You'll be late," Mira said. "They can wait. They don't wait, they reassign." He turned and looked at her. She was pretty in the way she had always been pretty, small, dark-eyed, with a quietness behind her face that was not shy but a kind of withholding, as if she kept a second person inside her and only let him meet the first. She was holding the companion in the crook of her arm. The companion was 3 years old today by its growth program, with translucent silicone skin warmed to 98.6 and pale blue eyes that tracked light. It was crying. It always cried in the mornings. The conclave's behavior engineers said that mimicking colic strengthened the bond. "Hand it here," Ren said. "Don't call her it. Hand her here then." Mira passed the doll over. The weight was wrong. The Veld had matched mass perfectly, but a real child would have shifted in his arms, would have flinched, would have looked at the ceiling. The companion only made the sound. The sound, the dry recorded sound. Ren rocked it the way the domestic adjustment officer had coached them to rock it on the wall screen, and the crying program registered the motion and slowed and stopped. "There," he said. "Good as new." Mira looked at him for a long second, then she took the doll back and set it in the wall cradle and closed the cradle and turned the lock. "Don't do that," he said. "It can't hear me." "That isn't what I mean," she did not answer. She crossed to the door and stood with her back to him and waited, and after a moment, he picked up his coat and joined her, and they went down together to the street. The street was a riverbed of people. The Eastern Reservation held 41,000 humans inside 3 square kilometers of vertical housing, and at shift change the human ration of the air thinned and became a thing to fight for. Ren and Mira moved with the crowd, masks fitted, gloves on the way you move in a current, leaning, not pushing. Above them the gray sky was crossed and recrossed by the long, slow shapes of Veld transports. The Veld did not breathe Earth's air. They had not modified it. They had simply built their cities upward, on cooler levels, while the smog the human factories had made, before the annexation settled and stayed, and did its slow work on the lungs below. Ren was 34 years old. He could remember a sky. They worked at the Heritage Dome. This was the joke of his life, and he had learned not to laugh at it. Before the annexation, he had been a structural engineer. He had designed water systems for cities that no longer existed by that name. Now he and Mira and 7 other licensed human performers reenacted 20th century domestic scenes inside a climate-controlled glass enclosure for the benefit of Veld tourists, who pressed their long, flat faces to the glass and watched. The dome was divided into rooms. There was a kitchen room, where a man pretended to read a newspaper while a woman pretended to fry eggs, except there were no longer eggs, and the pan was cold, and the newspaper was a printed prop made of synthetic fiber so that it would not yellow. There was a bedroom room, where 2 performers lay under a quilt and pretended to sleep, while a recorded alarm went off every 11 minutes. There was a park room with its plastic grass and its single-mounted taxidermied dog. A beagle, Ren thought, though the placard called it simply Canis. The placard said, "Before the Grace, humans kept these creatures in their homes. They gave them names. They mourned them when they died." Mira worked the nursery room. This had been a coincidence at the time of assignment, 8 years ago. Now it was not a coincidence to her anymore. She sat in a rocking chair under hot white lights for 9 hours a day and rocked a companion exactly like the one in their kitchen cradle and sang to it, songs from a list the cultural liaison had approved. Twinkle little star, hush little baby. The Veld came and watched her through the glass and made low clicking sounds in their throats and moved on. That morning, walking up the steps to the staff entrance, Mira said very quietly, "I want to talk to you tonight. Talk now, no tonight." He looked at her. Something in her face had moved. "All right," he said. In the museum's central atrium before the shift, a Veld guide was leading a tour group past the wall of cautionary examples. The wall was a vertical display of holographic portraits, each face slowly rotating, each accompanied by a name and a number. The names were old human names. The numbers were the count of children each one had born or fathered before the grace. Ren had passed the wall thousands of times. He still slowed for it. Today the portrait at eye level was a woman with dark hair and a wide, tired smile, and the placard beneath her read, Subject 11447, 7. The Veld Guide was explaining, in its careful synthesized English, that this individual was representative of the pre-grace breeding cohort, that 7 offspring from a single body had been not only legal but celebrated, that the bodies in question had been used as a vector for resource extraction at a scale the conclave found instructive. A young Veld near the back of the group made the clicking sound. It was, Ren had come to understand, the closest thing the Veld had to laughter. He kept walking. The tour group followed their guide past the wall and into the hall of implements, where the things humans had once handled were laid out behind glass on velvet beds. A pen, a toothbrush, a pair of scissors, a key. The guide explained each in turn. The pen was a stick that held a fluid called ink, which was used to mark a sheet called paper, which had been made by killing a thing called a tree. Each sentence in the Veld Guide's commentary required 2 new vocabulary footnotes projected onto the wall in the elegant glyphs of the conclave script. The tourists read them and clicked. They were polite people in their way. They were horrified by the inefficiency of it all, and they tried to hide their horror because they had been taught that horror, openly displayed, was a discourtesy to the species whose dead implements you were looking at. Ren had once watched a Veld child stand at the case of the keys for almost an hour. There were 43 keys in the case, recovered from various human dwellings of the late 20th century, each catalogued by shape and pattern. The child had pressed its long, flat face to the glass and looked at each key in turn. Ren had not been able to read its expression. The Veld had no expressions, only postures. But the posture, he thought afterward, had been something close to grief. The child had been looking at the keys the way you look at a language you will never learn, and at the locks they had once opened. All of them gone now, all of those small private rooms. He kept walking. He worked the garage room that day. The garage room had a real car in it, an old one, gasoline burning, restored down to the cracks in its vinyl seats. Ren's job was to lift the hood and pretend to work on the engine, while a recorded voiceover explained to the watchers, in 3 languages, what an internal combustion engine had been, and why humans had loved them, and what that love had cost. He had been doing this for 6 years. He could do it with his eyes shut. He let his hands move where they needed to move, and he thought about Mira's face that morning and the small movement in it, and what it could mean. He thought he knew. He was afraid he knew. When his shift ended, he washed in the staff facility and put his street clothes back on, and waited for Mira at the side door under the awning, where the air was a little better because of the filters. She came out with her coat over her arm, and her hair down, and her face pale, and she did not look at him. And they walked home through the crowd without speaking, and when they were inside the apartment, with the door shut, she sat down on the edge of the bed and put her hands in her lap and said, "I didn't take the cycle." He stood very still. The cycle was the small white console mounted on the bathroom wall. After intercourse, you stood in front of it and you pressed the green pad, and a pale blue light passed through your abdomen, and any conception was terminated cleanly, painlessly, without trace. It was the law. It was the architecture of the grace. Every apartment in the reservation had one. The light came on, and the soft chime sounded, and then you washed your hands and went to bed. 3 weeks ago, Ren had heard the chime through the closed door. He had heard it. "I made the sound on the console," Mira said. "I held down the test button. It made the same sound." "Mira, I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. I don't know what I am." "How long?" 11 weeks. He sat down beside her. He did not touch her. He could feel his pulse in his fingertips and in the soft place behind his jaw, and he could hear, very faintly, the climate unit cycling, and beyond that the city, and beyond that the long thin whine of a Veld skiff somewhere out over the smog. They monitor the consoles, he said. They monitor the cycle counts. I know. They'll come. I know, Mira. I'm not going to do it now, she said. She was looking at her hands. I waited. I waited because I had to be sure, and now I'm sure, and I'm not going to do it now. If you tell me to, I'll go. I'll leave. I won't make you part of it. But I'm not going to do it. He thought of 7 dozen things to say. He said none of them. After a long time he reached over and put his hand on hers, and her hand was cold, and he held it until it was not cold anymore. What will we do with it? He said finally. She looked up at him. We'll love it, she said. It is a peculiar thing to live a lie inside a glass box. You learn it the way you learn a language. You learn which muscles to hold loose and which to hold tight. You learn the rhythm of a normal breath. You learn to laugh at the small noises your body makes. Because if you laugh first, no one will think them strange. They told no one. Mira's tunic was loose at the waist, and Veld biology did not read human bodies fluently, and the cultural liaison, who reviewed their performance logs once a month, was a low-clearance functionary with 8 other facilities to supervise. They had time. They had, by Ren's calculation, 6 months of time. He used it. He had been a structural engineer. The apartment block they lived in had been built in the late 20th century by a contractor who, like most contractors of that era, had cut every corner he could find. Ren had grown up reading the blueprints of buildings like this one. He knew what was behind the walls. He knew where the old sewer lines ran, the ones the Veld had decommissioned but not removed, because removing them would have meant excavation. And excavation was expensive, and the Conclave had decided long ago that the human reservations could be sealed but not refined. In the 2nd month he began to dig. He did it at night, in the closet under the stairs, the one Mira used to store the linens. He cut the back panel away and pried at the synth plaster until it gave. He worked with a folded ration tin sharpened against the floor grate. He worked in absolute silence. He filled a duffel bag with the rubble and carried it to the Heritage Dome in the mornings and emptied it, a handful at a time, into the park room's plastic grass. By the 4th month he had reached the old line. It was a tube of vitrified clay 40 centimeters across. And there was a smell coming out of it that he had not smelled in a long time. The smell of standing water, of damp, of a place that had been forgotten. He sat in the closet, with his cheek against the rim of it, and he wept very quietly because he had not known until that moment that there were still places on Earth that the Veld had forgotten. It became his ritual. After Mira slept, he would slide the linens out of the closet and crawl into the cavity and work. The synth plaster came away in pale flakes that smelled faintly of glue. The old brick beneath it was the color of dried tea. He worked with the ration tin until his palms blistered, and then he wrapped his palms in strips torn from one of his old shirts and worked until the strips were brown. He counted bricks. There were always 17 rows to the next joint. He had memorized the original blueprints when he was 22 years old in a city that no longer had its name, and he had not known then what he was memorizing them for. And he understood now, in the closet under the stairs at 3 in the morning, with his face wet and his hands bleeding, that a man does not always know what he is preparing for until he is preparing for it. He mapped his way out by feel. He sketched the old sewer system from memory on the back of a ration card and burned the card afterward. He learned which pipes had been rerouted for Veld waste. Those would be hot, monitored, no good, and which had been simply walled off and forgotten. The forgotten ones were the ones that smelled. The forgotten ones were the ones he wanted. In the 5th month their son was born. It was a Sunday. He came at 3 in the morning, fast, almost without warning, and Ren delivered him on the kitchen floor by the light of a flashlight wrapped in a towel, because he was afraid the companion in the wall cradle was wired. He had no training. He had a printed-out diagram he had memorized and burned. He had a length of clean string and a pair of scissors. He had Mira's hand, crushing his hand. The baby came in a rush and a wet quiet, and Ren held him slick and steaming in the towel, and his small face was screwed up, and his small mouth opened, and he took the first breath of his life. He did not cry. That was the first thing about him. He was a quiet child. He looked at the kitchen ceiling with his unfocused eyes, and he made a small sound that was not a cry, only a noise, the way an animal might make a noise to test its own throat. Mira reached up for him, and Ren put him down on her chest, and she said his name. They had picked it months ago. They had picked it lying in the dark, whispering like teenagers. She said, Sam. The boy lived in the bottom drawer of the dresser. They had taken the bottom drawer out of the dresser and built a cradle inside the cavity, and lined it with the soft cotton lining of Wren's old engineering jacket. When the Veld inspectors came, twice a month, sweeping the apartment with their long sensor wands, the cradle was empty, and the drawer was back in place, and the boy was inside the wall, in a pocket Wren had cut between the studs, breathing through a length of plastic tube that ran up to the ventilation grill. He was a quiet child. They could not afford for him to be otherwise. He learned to be quiet the way other children learn to walk. By his second month he would not cry even when he was hungry. He would only look at you, his eyes wide and dark and patient, and you would know what he wanted by the way he looked. Wren would carry him to the window at night, when the apartment block was dark and the surveillance drones were on their predictable east side circuit. He would hold the boy up and let him look at what passed for stars. There were 2, sometimes 3 when the smog thinned. Wren would say their names. He had remembered the old names, and the boy would watch him say them, and his small hand would close on Wren's collar. Mira sang to him in the cradle in the dresser, the same songs she sang in the nursery room of the Heritage Dome. Twinkle little star, hush little baby. But she sang them differently now. She sang them the way they had been meant to be sung, low into the curve of a real ear. They were happy. This is the strange thing. They were terrified every hour of every day, and they were happy. Wren would catch himself, walking back from a shift, smiling under his mask at nothing. He would have to school his face before he came up the stairs. There was a flask. He had had it for years. It was a small stainless thing the size of his palm, scratched all over, and it had belonged to his father and his father's father before him, and inside it Wren kept a few centiliters of the synthetic spirit the reservation issued at the new year. Once a week, on the night before his rest day, he would take it out and pour a thumb's measure into a tin cup for himself and a thumb's measure for Mira. They had done this every week of their marriage. It was the smallest and most reliable ceremony of their life together. After the boy came, Wren added a step. He would pour the 2 measures and then, very carefully, he would touch the rim of the flask, just the rim, just the metal that had touched his lips, to the back of his son's hand, where the skin was thinnest. The boy would not understand. The boy would only look at his father with his patient dark eyes, and the small touch of cold would surprise him for a half second, and then his face would clear. It was not a thing the Veld could ever have measured. It was not a thing Wren could ever have explained, even to himself. But he did it every week. He did it because his father had done it for him. He did it because once you stop doing the small things they take from you, you have given them everything. The neighbors found out in the 7th month. Their names were Davik and Olin Pell. They lived across the corridor. They were a paired unit of the older generation, and they had taken the grace harder than most. Olin had stopped speaking for almost a year after the edict. She had a companion she carried with her everywhere, even to the dining hall, and she rocked it constantly, and her eyes had the cracked glass look that the cultural adjustment officers were trained to flag, and that no one ever flagged because everyone had it. She came into the apartment without knocking. Mira was nursing. There was a silence that lasted a very long time. Then Olin Pell sat down on the edge of the bed and reached out one trembling hand, and Mira after a moment let her touch the baby's foot. "Oh," Olin said, "oh." That night Davich came too. He stood in the doorway with his hands flat against his thighs and his face working, and he said in a thin voice not meant to carry, "We won't tell. We won't ever tell. We only want to be near him sometimes." Wren looked at Mira. Mira looked at Olin Pell, who was holding the baby now against the older woman's flat, empty chest, and rocking him with her whole upper body and crying without sound. "All right," Wren said. He felt the cold in his stomach as he said it. He said it anyway. It was, he understood later, the first mistake. It was also the only mistake any human in his position would not have made. The Veld did not understand it, because the Veld did not understand it. They had ledgers for grief, but no equations for it. They could not have predicted that 2 human beings in a state of bereaved hunger, given a glimpse of a child, would not be able to keep their hands closed around the secret. The Veld did not understand that the secret was not the danger. The hands were. For 2 months it worked. The Pells came in the evenings after the corridor was quiet. They brought small things, a knitted square they had hoarded from before the grace, a bottle of synthetic milk they had saved from their ration. They sat on the floor by the cradle in the dresser, and they looked at the boy, and they did not speak. In the 9th month it began to come apart. Olin wanted to hold him longer. Olin wanted to feed him. Olin brought a companion's tunic knitted by hand and dressed the baby in it without asking. Mira took it off. Olin put it back on. Mira took it off again. The fights were not loud. They could not afford to be loud. They were whispered, savage things conducted in the corner by the window. And Davik would stand at the wall with his hands at his sides and not look at his wife and not look at Ren. And the baby would lie in the dresser drawer and watch the ceiling with his patient dark eyes. Mira said, "She thinks he's hers." Ren said, "She knows he isn't. She thinks he is." Mira, "She knows." But Mira was right. He knew Mira was right. He had seen the way Olin Pell looked at the boy, and it was not the way you look at something that belongs to someone else. It was the way you look at something that belongs to you, and has been kept from you a long time. The night it broke, Olin had been holding the baby for 2 hours. Sam was asleep against her shoulder. Mira said it was time, and reached, and Olin turned her body so that the baby was on the far side of her, away from his mother. "Just 5 more minutes," Olin said. "It is time. 5 more minutes. Olin, give him to me." "You're being selfish," Olin said. Her voice had changed. The cracked glass thing in her eyes had finally gone all the way through. "You have him all day. All day. You've had him all his life and you don't know what it is too." Mira took the baby. She took him out of Olin's arms with a strength Ren did not know she had. Olin made a sound, a small, wet, terrible sound, and Davik was at the door already, his hand on the latch. His face turned away, and Ren understood, with a perfect cold clarity, that they had perhaps 4 hours. He went to the closet under the stairs. They came at dawn the way the Veld always came. The skiff dropped low and silent over the building, and the corridor filled with the sound of locks releasing in sequence. And Ren was waiting by the kitchen window with Mira, and the baby behind him and the duffel bag at his feet. And when the inspectors came through the door, he did not resist. There were 3 of them, tall, pale, the long flat face, the 4-jointed limbs, the dark synthetic envirosuits that protected them from human atmosphere. Their leader gestured. The translator at its throat said, it's a smooth synthesized voice that always made Ren think of weather reports. "Hands, hands, hands." He raised his hands. They took the baby out of Mira's arms. Mira did not scream. She had practiced not screaming for 9 months, and her body remembered the practice. The Veld inspector held Sam at arm's length like a piece of fruit, and the translator said, "Confirmed, confirmed, confirmed." They were marched downstairs. The dome was already there in the street. The Veld used domes for transgression executions, because the dome was a teaching object. The neighbors could not avoid seeing it. And the dome stayed in place for the prescribed morning interval, after the suffocation. And by then, everyone in the block had walked past it a dozen times and learned what it meant. This one was perhaps 4 meters across. Transparent at the moment of placement, painted red afterward, it sat in the middle of the street like a great glass blister. Olin Pell was at her window. Ren saw her. Her hand was at her mouth. Her eyes were the eyes of someone who has just understood, finally and forever, what she has done. He did not look at her long. They were placed inside. Ren, Mira, the baby in Mira's arms. The dome was lowered. The seal made a sound like a kiss. The Veld officer at the controls did something with its long, flat fingers, and the air inside the dome was set to begin its slow exchange with a thinner air, an air with less oxygen in it than even the reservation streets. And from somewhere a Veld voice said, the way the Veld always said it, "Grace is life. Grace is life. Grace is life." The dome would be painted red in 12 hours. The Veld walked away. They were a thorough people, but not a vigilant one. They did not stand and watch executions. The dome did the watching for them. From the other side of the glass, the world looked refracted, slightly bowed at the edges, the way the world looks when you put your face very close to a clean window. Ren could see, perhaps 50 meters away, a reservation child standing at a corner in a small mask, holding the hand of an adult Ren could not see, staring at the dome with the flat curiosity of a person to whom executions had been weather since birth. The child raised its free hand. It might have been a wave. It might have been nothing. The adult pulled the child away around the corner and they were gone. Mira looked at Ren. Ren smiled at her. He had never in his life smiled at her the way he smiled at her now. He sat down on the pavement and he began, very calmly, to take off his boot. The boot's heel was hollow. Inside the heel was a coil of ceramic fiber line, and a small ceramic blade, and a hand-cranked diamond drill the size of his thumb. He had carried these things in his boots for 4 months. He had made them at the Heritage Dome from scrap on his lunch breaks. The Veld scanned for metal. They did not scan for ceramic. He set the drill against the pavement at the exact place he had calculated. 8 months ago, sitting in the closet under the stairs, with the smell of standing water coming up through the broken plaster, he began to crank. His hands knew the motion. His hands had practiced it in the dark of the closet for 4 months. Against scrap concrete he had pried from the bathroom wall and patched back over with chewed bread. He had timed himself with a count of his own heartbeats, and he had timed himself until the count was steady, and the count was steady now. Mira held the baby. The baby watched him with his patient dark eyes. The baby did not cry. The baby had never cried. The pavement was not difficult. The contractor in the late 20th century had cut every corner he could find. 40 centimeters down, Ren hit the old sewer line, and the drill broke through, and the smell of standing water came up into the dome, and Mira began to laugh, silently, the way a person laughs in church. He widened the hole with the ceramic blade. He sawed for an hour. His shoulders burned. The air in the dome was thinning, and he was beginning to see small lights at the edges of his vision. And the baby in Mira's arms had gone very still. And Ren knew that if he stopped to think about that he would not be able to start again. So he did not stop. When the hole was wide enough, he lowered Mira first. He had to push her shoulders through. Then the baby, passed down into her waiting hands in the dark like a small parcel. Then himself last, dropping into the wet, the old wet, the forgotten wet of the world. In the sewer there was a raft. He had put it there in the 7th month, deflated, in a sealed canister wedged between 2 pipes. It had taken him 11 nights to walk it down from his dig in the closet, crawling in the dark, marking his route with chalk. He inflated it with the hand pump. The hiss filled the tunnel like a long exhale. They climbed in. The current was slow, but it was real. The old human cities had built their sewers to flow downhill toward the sea, because gravity was free, and the Veld in their tower cities had never reversed that engineering. The water carried them. Mira held the baby against her chest. Sam had begun finally to make sound, small, exhausted, alive sounds. Ren watched her in the half-light from his shoulder torch. She was looking down at the boy. Her face was wet. He could not have said with what. "Where are we going?" she said. He thought about that. There was an island he knew. There had been an island 300 kilometers south, off the coast, where the old governments had buried the last of the nuclear stockpile in the year of his grandfather's birth. The Veld had never gone there. The Veld did not like radiation. It confused their sensors. The island had been a forbidden zone for 60 years, and the smog had been kept off it by some accident of the weather. And the satellite photographs Ren had once seen, long ago, in a classified engineering file at his old job, had shown a thin green ring around its edges. Grass, perhaps. Or moss. Something living. He did not know if anyone could live there. He did not know if it would kill them slowly with what was buried under it. He did not know if there was anyone else there at all, or if they had been the only 2 human beings on Earth stubborn enough to dig. He said, "South. We're going south. There's a place." "What place?" "A place no one has been to in a long time." She nodded. She did not ask anything else. The baby on her chest made his small alive sound, and she bent her face to his and breathed in the smell of his head. In the year that followed, when they had reached the place and found it as he had hoped and as he had feared, a thin green ring of moss along its edges, a wind that smelled of salt and not of copper, and at its center the long, low concrete bunkers under which the old weapons slept. Ren would build a shelter from the wreck of a Coast Guard station. He would catch fish in a tide pool with his hands. He would teach the boy, who would grow strong, to read from the only book he had been able to carry, which was a child's atlas of Earth printed before the annexation. The boy would learn the old names for the countries that no longer had names. He would learn slowly that his parents were not the only people on the island. There were others who had come the way they had come, by sewer and by raft and by stubbornness, and they had a village in a place the Veld had forgotten, and they sang to their children in the old tongues. The Veld would not find them. The Veld had not been built to find them. The Veld had been built to count and to plan and to dome and to repeat. They had built an empire of ledgers, and they had ruled the Earth from above, and they had never understood that the species below them did not break the way they thought it broke. The Veld did not understand that a human being, given a hole in the floor and a child to carry, will dig for months without asking permission, will dig in absolute silence by the light of a flashlight wrapped in a towel, because the thing being carried is worth more than any law that has ever been written about the carrying of it. The Veld did not understand that the small, unimportant gestures, a song hummed into the curve of an ear, a string tied off a knitted square, were not weaknesses of the species. They were the species, they learned eventually. Some of them did. There were Veld scholars, much later, who wrote in their cold, synthesized way about the anomaly of the Eastern Reservation, and about the disappearance of 41 human beings into a sewer line that had been on no current map. and about the strange data signature that came afterward from a forbidden island. Weak at first, and then less weak. Children, perhaps. The Veld scholars used the word infestation. Then they used the word resurgence. Then, after a long time, they stopped using words for it at all, and only watched, and clicked their throats softly, and conceded, in the way the Veld conceded, that they had been wrong. But that was much later. That was a long time after dawn in a sewer, after a baby's first alive sound in the dark, after a man with a ceramic drill cranked it through a 40-centimeter slab of cheap 20th century concrete and made a hole the world had never asked him to make. On the raft drifting south, Ren put his hand on his wife's hand. The baby slept between them. The current carried them under the old broken pipework of a city that had been theirs once, and would be theirs again perhaps. In some shape neither of them could yet imagine. Mira said very softly, the way she had said it in the bedroom 9 months before, "We'll love him." Ren closed his eyes. He listened to the water. He listened to the small sound of his son's breathing. He listened, very far above them and very far behind them, to the long, thin whine of a Veld skiff making its dawn rounds, broadcasting the edict to a city that had, in one apartment on one quiet morning, finally stopped listening. "Grace is life," the Veld said. He smiled. "Yes," he thought. "Yes it is, but not your kind." The current carried them on.